Late at night, the city remained bustling. Barron stopped on the sidewalk, right next to his restaurant. The bright lights from the large windows reflected on the wet street, creating an ethereal atmosphere. The sounds of noisy cars, the chatter of pedestrians, all blended together into a never-ending symphony. Barron stood there for a moment, as if trying to find a bit of peace amidst the chaos of the world around him. He looked into the restaurant, through the shining glass. Everything seemed perfect. Dinner was still going on in the luxurious ambience inside. But something inside Barron felt unsatisfied. He felt as though he were an outsider, like a stranger watching the very establishment he had built. This feeling, this unnamed anxiety, made him uneasy. Was he doing the right thing? He turned, quickly heading toward the back door. This was the secret entrance known only to those within the company. He didn't want anyone to see him entering, not wanting to draw attention. Since the beginning of the restaurant's construction, Barron had been very cautious about his image. He had spent years to achieve this, to ensure everything was perfect. Yet, it seemed that once he had attained it, he felt as though something important was slipping away. The back door creaked open. Inside, the space was dim, and the aroma of food filled the hallway. Barron stepped in, his shoes making no sound. The wide hallway, with its ever-present paintings on the walls, created the feeling of a private space within the restaurant. He passed by the kitchen area, hearing the clattering of dishes and the soft murmur of the chefs conversing with each other. Suddenly, he saw an unexpected sight. A man, with messy hair, a pale face, and a gaunt body, was being pushed out the front door by the restaurant's security. The man looked around, his face blank and disappointed. His eyes were full of desperation, as if pleading for one last chance. Barron stood still in the shadows, watching. He didn't recognize the man, but his presence in the luxurious space of the restaurant made Barron feel an indescribable discomfort. The security guard, his face expressionless, maintained a firm stance, showing no sympathy. "You can't sit here," the guard said, his voice even. "There's no place for someone like you." The man stood still, his mouth opening as if to say something, but no words came out. He could only step back, not leaving immediately. Barron could see the pain, the confusion in the man's eyes. A choking feeling filled his chest. Everything around seemed to stop, leaving only the image of the man struggling against the rejection, seeking a little comfort in a cold world. Barron stood there, his hands in his coat pockets, staring intently at the scene before him. Part of him wanted to step forward, to help, but another part hesitated. He was the owner of this restaurant, and after all, this was part of the job he had chosen. His restaurant had to maintain its image. It had to retain its status in the eyes of customers. And to do that, he couldn't let people who didn't fit that image in. Barron's inner turmoil grew stronger. With every passing second, he felt more distant from himself, from his ideals. Why did it have to be like this? Why did he feel uneasy when he saw that man? These questions kept swirling in Barron's mind, but he couldn't find the answers. Barron remained silent, his eyes fixed on the man retreating with a look of disappointment, not uttering another word. Every small movement of the man seemed to seep into Barron's body, making his heart feel heavier. Just a few more seconds, and the man would disappear from his sight. But Barron felt as though a part of him couldn't let that happen. He sighed, asking himself if maintaining the restaurant's policies was worth it when witnessing this scene. Was he really trying to protect the so-called image of the restaurant while forgetting that out there, somewhere, there were people who needed just a bit of love, a small act of kindness? The security guard glanced over and noticed Barron's presence. He nodded slightly, as if asking permission for the man to leave. Barron didn't look back at him, but continued to watch the homeless man shakily stand up. His torn coat, worn-out shoes, and emaciated face. He didn't dare look into Barron's eyes, keeping his head down, perhaps not wanting to receive pity. "Sir, may I come in?" Barron finally broke the silence. His voice was low, not too fast nor too slow, as if this had been a decision he had made deep inside, even though his inner turmoil was still strong. The man looked up, his round eyes wide in surprise. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly stepped toward the restaurant door, each step seeming like a heavy burden weighing on his shoulders. Barron watched him, the hesitation in his heart slowly giving way to a gentler feeling. "We'll prepare a meal for you," Barron said, offering a faint smile, not the smile of a restaurant owner, but the smile of a human being, one who had to face the painful truth that sometimes work and ideals don't always align. As the man entered, Barron felt as though a door had opened in his own heart. The entrance wasn't just the doorway to the restaurant. It was the doorway to a life he seemed to have forgotten in his years of being busy building his career. He looked toward the grand door, where the customers were enjoying their meals, in a world entirely different from the world of the man he had just invited in. Barron sighed softly, and for the first time that day, he felt a sense of relief. Barron stood there, silently observing the man sitting down at a table near the window, his hands trembling slightly as he took the hot bowl of soup from the server. The atmosphere in the restaurant seemed quieter now, as if no one dared to disrupt this shift. The homeless man said nothing, only bowed his head, staring at his meal. The light from the chandelier reflected off his gaunt face, making Barron feel even more empty inside. The man ate slowly, as though every bite of food was a precious gift, each spoonful of soup being lifted to his mouth like a sacred ritual. Barron stood from a distance, still watching, unable to tear his eyes away from the scene. He saw a part of himself in that man, the helplessness, the loneliness, and a sadness too deep for words. "Do you need anything else?" The server came back and asked gently. "No, thank you." The man responded, his voice rough, as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. He looked down at his bowl of soup, his lips moving as though trying to say thank you, but the words didn't come out. Barron stood nearby, sensing the strangeness in the air, between the opulence of the restaurant and the poverty of the man. Barron walked closer and sat down gently on the chair across from him. A moment of silence, neither of them spoke. Though every eye in the restaurant had turned toward them, Barron didn't feel any shame or discomfort. He just felt a compelling urge, an urge he couldn't explain. "You probably didn't think you'd have dinner at this restaurant, did you?" Barron spoke in a calm, deep voice. The man looked up, his eyes dazed as if he hadn't realized someone was speaking to him. But then a glimmer of light appeared in his eyes, perhaps surprise, perhaps emotion. He didn't answer immediately, but just nodded slightly, as if not wanting to break the quiet around them. Barron looked at the bowl of soup, then back at the man. At that moment, he felt a deep empathy. The world the man lived in, the world Barron had only heard about in stories and from the media, now seemed to be right in front of him. That feeling made Barron question, am I living the right life? Or is everything I do just chasing material values, while forgetting the small, simple things that are full of meaning? Barron sighed, blaming himself for focusing so much on running the restaurant and forgetting about the people outside, those who couldn't afford to come to a place like this. He looked at the man once more, feeling a powerful urge rise within him. If everything could change, he would be the one to make that change happen. "Do you have a family?" Barron asked, trying to pull the man out of the silence. The man shook his head gently, his eyes lowering, becoming somber as though they held a long story he couldn't share. Barron understood that not everyone wanted to open up to strangers, but in this moment, he felt a strange connection, a feeling as if they could share everything without speaking. "Perhaps I can't change your life right away," Barron said softly. "But at least tonight, you won't have to worry about your meal." The man looked at Barron again, his eyes shining with a hint of new hope, a small spark of light in the darkness. And although no one spoke further, Barron felt something shift inside him. He stood up, walking away softly, without saying a word, but his heart felt lighter than it ever had before. Barron turned to walk away, but not to leave the restaurant. He simply wanted to observe a little longer. From a distance, he could still see the homeless man sitting there, his meal slowly diminishing, but the silence remained. Perhaps, in the man's heart, each spoonful of soup wasn't just a meal. It was a call for hope that he had almost given up on long ago. Barron's steps were light, but his mind was battling a storm. The sense of unease hadn't left him. In fact, it was growing stronger. He had opened the door for the man, but in his heart, he couldn't shake the question, had he done the right thing? Would this act change anything for the homeless man? Or was it just a temporary comfort that couldn't bring about any lasting change? These questions haunted Barron as he glanced back at the dining room, where the guests were enjoying their meals. Each person had their own story, their own reason for being here, but in Barron's eyes, they seemed like fleeting figures in his life. A part of him felt like he was living in a world entirely different from that of the homeless man. A world of abundance, wealth, and comfort, while the man outside only knew life through the struggles of each passing day. Barron sat down, his eyes still fixed on the homeless man. He began to feel an odd sense of torment. Even though he had decided to bring the man in, to give him a meal and a place to sit, had he truly helped? Would this action actually change his life, or was it just a small band-aid for a problem too vast to solve? The light in the restaurant seemed to fade a little in Barron's eyes. He felt the fatigue of both his body and his mind. Meetings, strategies, numbers, and reports, all of those things no longer seemed to matter. What he was truly searching for, what he had lost in the years spent building his career, was something simpler and more genuine: the connection between human beings. As Barron was lost in his thoughts, the homeless man stood up. He stretched wearily, then looked around as if unsure of what to do next. Barron didn't want to just stand by. He walked over. But this time, he didn't have a question. He simply made a gesture to invite the man closer. "Thank you," the man said, but his voice was hoarse and weak. "I don't know what to say." Barron smiled gently and replied, "No need to thank me. We're all human, aren't we?" The man looked at him with a puzzled expression, as if he didn't fully understand the meaning of those words. But still, in this moment, there was a sense of harmony beginning to form between them. Barron felt like he was standing at a turning point in his life, a moment he couldn't predict. All he knew was that this was an action he would never regret. A while later, Barron stood up and walked over to the reception desk. He told the staff there that the homeless man would be allowed to stay longer, without the need to rush out. He requested a private table so the man could feel more comfortable and rest in a quieter space. "Thank you," the man said once again, his expression now somewhat brighter. He didn't say anything more, but Barron could see the gratitude in his eyes. Everything seemed to have changed from a simple meal, from a small gesture that Barron had thought might be insignificant. When Barron returned to the dining room, he felt as though he had done something truly meaningful. The customers around him were still laughing and talking, but for Barron, all he wanted was to find peace within himself. He no longer saw the homeless man as a stranger, but as a fellow human being, someone trying to survive in a world full of challenges. He wasn't sure if he could change the man's life, but at least he had changed his perspective on the world. And perhaps, that was the most important thing. Barron wondered if he could continue living like this, continuing to make decisions like the one he had made today, or if he would return to his previous mindset focused solely on practicality and profit. The answer hadn't come yet, but at least Barron knew he had crossed into a different door, a door that opened to empathy, compassion, and a new way of seeing life. After a few minutes of contemplation, Barron returned to the dining room, where the atmosphere had gradually returned to normal. The conversations, the clinking of knives and forks against plates, and the curious glances of the customers could not distract him. Barron's heart was still racing, as though he had just made an important decision. He turned toward the reception desk, where the restaurant manager was standing. A middle-aged man with graying hair, always with a serious demeanor, was the one Barron had entrusted with the responsibility of running everything. This manager was not only skilled in his work, but also had a clear vision for maintaining the restaurant's image. "Can we talk for a minute?" Barron spoke, trying to keep his voice steady, although his mind was still in turmoil. The manager nodded, stopped his work, and followed Barron to a quiet corner of the restaurant, away from prying eyes. They stood there in silence for a moment. Barron didn't know where to begin, but the only thing he could do was face his decision. "You see, that man, he's not like the other customers," Barron said, gently holding the napkin on the table. "He has no money, no status, but he's a human being. And today, I wanted to do something different." The manager looked at Barron with a neutral expression. "Aren't you worried this might affect the restaurant's image? I understand your point, but we are running a business. Customers come here to enjoy the luxurious atmosphere. They didn't come to see things like this." Barron remained silent for a long moment, his eyes resting on the large glass window in the distance, where the homeless man was still sitting, eating slowly. "I don't know. I just know I can't keep living the way I have. A part of me feels that no matter what we achieve in life, if we don't value the people around us, do those successes really matter?" The manager listened quietly but didn't respond immediately. After a long silence, he spoke calmly but firmly. "You can do whatever you want. but you need to understand that every action you take has consequences. If we let people who don't belong in this environment in, customers might feel uncomfortable, and they may not come back. We can't afford that kind of risk. Barron sensed the concern in the manager's voice. He understood that the manager was worried about the business, and it was a responsibility he had to shoulder. But Barron also knew he couldn't ignore what he had just witnessed. He couldn't just stand by and let things happen without doing anything. You don't understand, Barron said gently but with resolve. The feeling I had when I saw that man, it made me feel so small. I can't just live for work and profit anymore. We have a responsibility to people like him, even if they can't give us anything but a little compassion. The manager didn't respond immediately, just stood still, looking at Barron with a thoughtful expression. Finally, he sighed and shrugged. You're the boss, and you have the right to decide. But I still have to remind you that not all customers will understand this change. I hope you're ready to face the consequences, if any. Barron nodded, feeling a wave of guilt rise within him. I've thought about the consequences, but I can't just turn my back on the values I believe in because of them. I will accept it all. After all, if I don't stand by those who need help, then who will? The manager shrugged again, but then he sighed and looked at Barron with a different kind of look. I can't change your decision, Barron. But at least, I'll help you keep the restaurant unaffected. I'll allow you to continue doing what you think is right. Barron felt a bit of relief hearing these words. However, he knew that he still had a long journey ahead of him. His decision today wasn't just about the restaurant's image, but also a challenge to himself. Could he remain steadfast in the path he had chosen, no matter how difficult it became? As Barron turned back toward the table, he saw the homeless man again, now finished with his meal, sitting quietly for a while. Barron walked over, but this time, it wasn't as the restaurant owner. It was as someone who could empathize. Are you all right? Barron asked, his voice warmer than before. The man looked up, a faint smile appearing on his weary face. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Barron nodded without saying anything more. He knew that his words wouldn't change the man's life, but at least it would help him feel a bit of humanity in his difficult life. And that was the only thing Barron could offer. As the man stood up and left, Barron watched him go, feeling a strange sense of comfort rise within him. He had chosen the path of compassion, and although he didn't know where it would lead, at least he hadn't turned his back on those who needed help. As dinner gradually came to an end, the restaurant started to quiet down. The last of the guests had left, leaving the space serene for the staff to clean up. Barron stood alone at the reception desk, his eyes glazed, staring out the large window into the street. Everything outside seemed to continue as usual, but inside, a change had begun to take shape. He felt that he couldn't go back to the way things were before. It felt as if he had finally seen an important part of life that he had previously overlooked, what he now called compassion. The lights in the restaurant seemed dimmer in Barron's eyes, as though he was searching for a deeper meaning in everything around him. Since he began running the restaurant, everything had revolved around work, profit, and maintaining the brand's image. But tonight, he had seen something far more profound. He had seen the real human struggles people face every day. And he knew that, even though he couldn't change the whole world, there was at least one thing he could do: change the way he viewed the less fortunate. Barron, are you all right? The restaurant manager approached, still showing some concern. Everything's fine, right? Barron looked at him, then down at his hands, where a few scraps of paper with notes still lay. He didn't respond immediately. A part of him still felt exhausted, but the other part felt a sense of relief. Have you thought about what I said? Barron asked, his voice quiet. Can we do more for people like him? The man from today. The manager paused, thinking for a moment before replying. You know, I understand where you're coming from, but we really need to consider everything carefully. Even if you're doing this for the right reasons, not all of our customers will understand. One day, we might face a backlash, some opposition from our customers. Barron sensed the tension in the manager's words. He understood that, while his decision came from a place of kindness, it still had to face the practical challenges. I understand, Barron said softly, but I can't ignore it anymore. We can't just live for work. We have to live for people, don't we? The manager looked at Barron for a moment, his eyes glimmering with thought. Finally, he sighed. You're right. Maybe I've been too worried. But we'll have to prepare for whatever comes next. If you want to do this, I'll help you. Barron looked at the manager, feeling a bit of relief. He didn't know where everything would lead, but at least he knew he wasn't doing this alone. He felt the support, even if it was just from one person, but that was enough to make him feel stronger. At that moment, a server approached from a distance. "Mr. Barron, there's a call for you." It's from the manager of the restaurant chain across the street. Barron looked at the server and then turned back to the manager. A hint of worry crept into him, but he knew that whatever decision came next, he wouldn't turn away from the path he had chosen. "I'll take the call," Barron said with determination in his voice. "Thank you for understanding." As Barron walked toward the reception desk to take the call, he could feel a sense of tension rising again. This was the moment when he would need to make a bigger decision, not just simple choices like offering a free meal to a homeless person. This was when he had to face the true challenge of his own self. Could he maintain a balance between compassion and the pressures from work, from customers, and from himself? The call ended after a few minutes. Barron placed the phone down, his eyes filled with resolve. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but what would happen if he didn't try? The feeling inside him grew more and more certain. He couldn't stand still any longer. Barron turned back to look at the restaurant one last time. It was not just a business venture. It was a place where he had decided to make a difference. He wasn't just an owner. He was someone responsible for the community, for the people he met. Customers would come, but the people he encountered would stay in his memory far longer. And then, Barron knew that his decision today would not just impact the restaurant, but would be a turning point in his own life. He might face difficulties, but at least he had chosen the right path, the path of compassion and truth. That night, as things gradually quieted down, Barron asked himself just one question. If not now, then when? Barron stood still for a moment before stepping away from the reception area. The call had ended, and the worries still lingered in his mind. He returned to the dining room, where the lights were dimming, and the atmosphere had nearly become entirely silent. But Barron's heart couldn't be at peace. His footsteps echoed through the empty restaurant like the ringing of a bell, signaling that an important decision had been made. Each step felt heavy, as though he was carrying the weight of a new responsibility on his shoulders. He gazed toward the empty tables. The image of the homeless man, the man from today, flooded his mind. He imagined the scene again, the man eating slowly, as if savoring something precious, even though it was just a simple bowl of soup. Barron knew that something inside him had changed from that moment. He couldn't go back to how things were before. The world outside the restaurant, with people struggling each day, now felt closer than ever. As the remaining staff finished their tasks and prepared to leave, Barron told himself that he needed to do something truly meaningful, not just for the man, but for himself. He needed to find a way for this action to be more than just a simple gesture, but a part of how he built this restaurant. "Maybe it's time to change the way we view these things," Barron said to himself, his gaze still fixed on the quiet space. "We can't keep living solely for work and profit." Barron knew that his action today, though small in the eyes of many, was a big push in changing himself. He wasn't just doing this out of kindness. It was a profound awakening. This awakening wasn't just to help those in need, but to change how he viewed the world. Sometimes, a small gesture could change a whole life. He felt the need to meet with his associates, especially those working directly in the restaurant. They needed to understand that this change wasn't an easy decision, and that running a business had to go hand in hand with empathy and compassion. Barron couldn't just stand by and hope for intangible results. If he wanted this to truly make an impact, he needed everyone to be a part of this change. Barron walked down to the kitchen, where the chefs were still cleaning up after the busy evening. He paused for a moment, observing their every move, the professional and meticulous actions they took. The head chef, an older man, was wiping down the surface of the stove. Barron approached him and nodded in greeting. "Hello, I'd like to talk to you for a moment," Barron began, his voice low but filled with determination. The chef looked up, curiosity evident in his eyes. "What's going on, Mr. Barron?" Barron paused for a moment before continuing. "I want us to have a meeting tomorrow morning. We need to change the way we operate in this restaurant, not just about the menu or how we serve, but about how we treat people, including people like him, those who have nothing but a little hope." The chef fell silent, seemingly contemplating Barron's words. He nodded gently, but didn't say anything further. "I know this won't be easy, but if we don't start with the smallest actions, there will never be any real change," Barron continued. "And I believe that if we all work together, This restaurant will not only stand out for the quality of its food, but also as a place that truly brings meaning to the community. The chef didn't reply, but Barron could see the change in his expression. He could feel empathy from him, not in direct support, but at least in an openness. That was what Barron had hoped for. The next day, Barron held a small meeting with the core team. He explained his decision to change the restaurant's image, not just based on the products, but through how the restaurant treated the community around it. He wanted to create a friendly environment where even those who couldn't afford it would feel welcome, not just customers who could pay. "We'll start with small things," Barron said. "We will organize food donations for the homeless, and we'll continue to do this every month. I want this restaurant to be a place not just serving food, but a place to share, a place where people in need can always find a little hope." The staff in the room listened in silence, no one objecting. There was a quiet stillness in the air, as though they were reflecting on what Barron had just said. Finally, the manager spoke up. "What do you want us to do to get started?" Barron smiled, a sense of pride swelling within him. "We'll start by changing ourselves. And from there, everything else will change." Barron's decision today wasn't just a turning point in his career, it was a change in how he viewed life. He couldn't go back to the old values. A new world had opened up before him, one that wasn't just about profit and fame, but about sharing and helping those who were less fortunate. And it was actions like these that would lay the foundation for the restaurant's sustainable growth, as well as the way Barron could live a fuller life, with values that truly brought meaning. The next day, Barron's restaurant was no longer just a place serving delicious meals or offering a luxurious atmosphere. It had transformed into a space where sharing, compassion, and empathy were placed at the forefront. Everyone in the restaurant team participated in new activities, from organizing food donations for the homeless to holding small events where customers could contribute to the community. The restaurant no longer just served those who could afford it. It opened its doors to embrace anyone who needed a little help. Barron stood in the kitchen, looking out through the window, where the tables were no longer just for serving meals but also for connection, for spreading love. He saw customers who came not only to enjoy their meals but also to participate in the charitable activities the restaurant organized. They didn't just come to pay for a meal, but came to be part of what Barron and his team had created, a space for sharing. The restaurant manager entered, his face lighting up as he saw the noticeable changes in the atmosphere. "Barron, I can't believe how quickly this restaurant has transformed. Everyone feels more purposeful working here. The customers seem really happy too." Barron smiled, but his gaze remained on the employees working diligently. The change didn't come just from him. It came from everyone. "Thank you. It's thanks to everyone's support. We can't change anything if we stand alone." He understood that this path wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges, there would be moments of exhaustion, but the most important thing was that he had found a reason to continue, not just because of work, but because of the people, the community he wanted to build. Finally, Barron stood in front of the restaurant door, looking out at the street where the cars still roared and the city was alive with energy. He knew he had done the right thing. Every decision in life leads us somewhere, and Barron felt that he was walking in the right direction. He no longer felt alone, no longer felt that what he was doing was meaningless. Every smile, every glance he received from customers and his own team was proof of the changes he had created. And for Barron, this change didn't end here. It was just the beginning of a much longer journey, the journey of compassion, sharing, and making this world a better place, even if just a little. He knew that one day, what he had started would become a large movement, one where people would come together to spread love and help each other in life. Dear audience, the story of Barron and his decision to change has come to an end, but do you think these changes can be applied to our lives? What do you think about combining work with compassion? Can small actions really create a big difference? We'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this story. Please leave your comments and share your thoughts on how each of us can contribute meaningfully to the community. Thank you for following along, and we hope this story has inspired you.